South Korea has announced its intentions of becoming a first-tier arms supplier, and it's aiming to get to the number 4 position in a stagnant and oversaturated market, which hasn't seen any major changes in the rankings for decades. Why does Seoul attempt such a move, and could it actually succeed, or will it crumble under its own weight? Seoul has for its entire history been in a precarious state, nestled between great powers and empires, and a pawn in their political games. Seoul is surrounded by China, North Korea, Russia, and Japan. Three of those nations hold nuclear weapons. All of those nations have large and capable militaries, and two of them are great powers in their own right. Japan, to its east, is the world's third largest economy, and China, to its west, is the world's second largest economy. This unforgiving situation has been a constant in the history of South Korea and the Korean Peninsula as a whole, with it being successfully invaded and conquered by all of those powers, forcing it to find a great power patron, which historically had always been China. China had assisted Korea diplomatically and militarily, and in return, Korea was a quasi vassal state of Beijing. It had also been the only nation with which Beijing had kept diplomatic contact with in its periods of isolation, showing just how crucial this relationship was for both of the states. But this had changed after World War II, from which a divided Korean peninsula arose, split up between the Soviet-backed North Korea and the American-backed South Korea. Out of the shared values that Seoul and Washington had regarding the opposition of communism, an alliance rose, and the United States had become Seoul's great power patron after the Korean War. Although finding itself a new patron, Seoul had recognized early on that it could not solely rely upon Washington to defend it from Pyongyang's attacks. So it had started back in the 50s a small arms industry that had procured a small amount of small arms, all very small scale. But with the announcement of the Nixon Doctrine under President Nixon, Seoul had panicked and felt as if it was abandoned by its main ally. And so it had frantically tried to build up a new local defense industry in the nation almost from the ground up. It has utilized its local manufacturing sector and an America far more open to export its technologies and weapons systems to Asia. And so Seoul had built up the skill of its local industry on the back of manufacturing American weapons and learning American technology. It had started developing and manufacturing its own indigenous designs that were based off American tech back in the 80s and 90s, reaching an impressive level of sophistication in such a short time of 30 years. Seoul had managed to go from manufacturing an American M16 in the 60s to its own jet aircraft and submarines in the 90s, a 30-year time span, an impressive achievement by Seoul. But Seoul simply couldn't have developed indigenous weapons systems without exporting them to the wider arms market. Its army is far too small for such an option, and even if Seoul overprocures to subsidize the development and production costs of the system, it still won't be enough to make its domestic systems worth it in a cost and return perspective. Seoul can't make up the difference alone. It has to export its weapons. This exact problem was recognized by Seoul, and under the leadership of President Lee Myung-bak in 2007, began a program called Defense Reform 2020. The program was aimed to transform the defense industry in South Korea by making it an engine of economic growth with two main goals. $4 billion in annual exports, and 50,000 jobs in the sector. Of course, by 2020, the program had started picking up steam in its later years, when Seoul had managed to strike major deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars to export its weapons, primarily its submarines, howitzers, and a small number of its trainer combat jets, to countries such as Poland, India, the Philippines, and Indonesia. Those goals of the Defense Program 2020 had been met by 2020, and since then the export figures of the industry have jumped up dramatically, surpassing over $12 billion in exports by the end of 2022, making the exports 3 times larger than previously in 2 years ago. Absolutely insane. This has going on to make the industry much more viable and commercially competitive, improving its chance of staying in the market for the long term. But why have nations started buying Korean arms like hotcakes? And how come is Seoul now able to compete with first tier arms exporters such as Italy, Germany, and France? Well, Seoul has a few key factors that make its weapons more desirable than their competitors. But to understand why they matter, we first have to take a brief detour to explain a little about the global arms market. The global arms market is highly competitive, filled with large amounts of systems, all competing against each other in every single sector, even in the niche ones. The systems are generally similar to one another and offer almost the same capabilities, making them easily replaceable and almost interchangeable, almost like a commodity. And so the determining factor in a country choosing to procure a system that is basically a commodity isn't the capabilities of the system at hand, but the factors revolving around it, such as its price, preferably on the cheaper side, the delivery time of the system, how fast from sending an order can a country deploy the procured system in action, various technology sharing agreements that come from the deal, and the possibility of manufacturing being done locally. And of course, finally, the country of origin, since arms imports are inherently political. It's preferable to procure them from an allied nation or even a neutral one to minimize the risk of its weapons imports suddenly stopping since the country refuses to cooperate with it. South Korea has all of those factors going for it, making it such an attractive option and alternative. The capabilities of its systems have proven to be similar to its European counterparts, such as those in Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, but it offers those systems at cheaper prices and is able to deliver them in a quicker time frame. Seoul is quite willing to share its technologies with potential buyers and even offers them to manufacture some of their procured systems, contrasting it from the likes of the United States, who is very strict on its technology sharing agreements and which nation can procure certain weapons systems from it. Seoul, importantly, doesn't restrict the use of its weapons for its buyers, allowing them to use them as they please, as compared to the United States, who has strict rules for the use of its weapons that oftentimes contradict the wishes of its customer. And finally, Seoul is a less demanding arms export partner. It doesn't attempt to trap its partners into an arms ecosystem as other nations have done, such as the United States and China, by threatening to cut exports to any nation that dares to procure arms from the enemy. In this position, Seoul is a lot more ambiguous. It isn't a global geopolitical player, as other arms exporters are, and so the political impact of choosing to procure Korean systems is much diminished and doesn't threaten already existing alliances a nation may hold. Those beneficial factors have managed to seal deals for Seoul, but they were present for years. Just in the last 2 years, there has been a dramatic spike in billion-dollar deals for Seoul. What has changed to make its position suddenly so dominant? The world has grown more tense in recent years, with China's increasing hostility in the South China Sea, Iran's nuclear aspirations and terrorist groups, Turkey's plans of an offensive in northern Syria, and of course, the war in Ukraine. These are all prime motivators for countries all around the globe to upgrade and modernize their militaries in preparation for future conflicts and national security challenges. The war in Ukraine has also taken Russia out of the arms market and may have even hurt its position there for the long term. Do keep in mind that Moscow was the second largest arms exporter behind the United States, dealing a huge loss of supply to the entire market. The Russia-Ukraine war has done so by showing that Moscow's weapons were far off from the quality that it itself had promised. The sanctions that followed its start have partially disabled Moscow's ability to manufacture its own weapons by blocking it from Western components. And the weapons that do get finished are sent to the front instead to their original buyers. The war has also forced many countries in the West to start replenishing their own stockpiles, since many of their once store systems have been donated to Ukraine, and now they have to fill their stockpiles back up, hampering their ability to export new systems because it's much more critical for them to fill in their storage than to earn revenue from the sale of new produced weapon systems. As such, the ability of all large players in the market to deliver new systems has decreased. All the while, the demand has just increased, leading to a gap in the supply and demand of the global arms market. Seoul has the ability to fill in this gap. It hasn't delivered its systems free of charge to Ukraine, emptying its stockpiles in the process. As such, it doesn't need to fill them. Instead, it is able to export its weapons to an hungry market. Countries have recognized this opportunity and have jumped on to sign new arms deals with Seoul worth billions of dollars. Those deals include a 2021 deal with the United Arab Emirates to supply it with SAM missiles worth over $3.5 billion as a reaction to the Iranian sponsored terrorist attacks that have deployed drone strikes against its cities. A 2022 deal with Egypt for over $1.5 billion to supply it with K9 howitzers for its military modernization effort. And finally, by far the largest is Seoul's massive deals with Poland, worth collectively over $5.5 billion, delivering it 180 K2 main battle tanks and over 650 howitzers. This is a large part of Warsaw's military expansion and modernization project was kicked into gear with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Poland has taken to donating its old systems to Ukraine and replaced them with new Korean-made systems. As we can see, Seoul has managed to capitalize on this gap, drastically increasing the size of its exports to unprecedented levels that would have sounded mad just 2 years ago. But for every action there is a reaction, and Seoul is surrounded by highly powerful and reactive neighbors who have taken notice of this new trend in its arms exports, which directly endanger their position in the region and the arms market. They have not taken this threat lying down, and have all reacted to it. So, what are their reactions? Seoul's main rival, North Korea, has felt threatened with the increase in the capability of the South Korean army and the possibility of it gaining new, highly advanced weapons. It had been forced to amplify its unconventional methods, which give it an edge over its southern neighbor, primarily its nuclear weapons. Pyongyang had, as a response, to increase its investments in its nuclear arsenal, developing new missiles, and going as far as to prepare new nuclear tests. In addition to that, it has rapidly increased its threats to Seoul and Tokyo by launching missiles closer to the territory as a way of deterrence and a reminder of Pyongyang's capabilities. Russia has been directly affected by Seoul's expansion in the arms market, since this expansion is built off the backs of nations that used to buy Russian systems, and now they have switched over to Seoul, hurting its position in the market and taking away loyal customers. Moscow can't currently punish Seoul in any major way for its expansion. Its greatest asset, which it had previously used against Seoul to punish it for its action, has been North Korea. The same asset, North Korea, is currently supplying it with weapons to fight against Ukraine. Moscow cannot threaten Seoul by promising Pyongyang new systems since it itself doesn't have them in inventory, all of them being diverted to the front. And even after the war is finished, Moscow will have to take at least a couple of years to recuperate, and it still won't be in the position to hamper Seoul's supposed digression. And finally, and most importantly, is China. Seoul has also been taking away its active and future customers. But Beijing, unlike Moscow, is in a great position to react, and so it did. Beijing has the ability to strike at Korean chaebol, who directly contribute large amounts to its economy. Those same chaebol manufacture some of their products in China, and Beijing also has the ability to restrict imports from Seoul, which it had already done in the past. In addition to those actions, Beijing has taken to military posturing around the Korean peninsula, sending its fishermen to fish in Seoul's waters and flying fighter jets close to its EEZ. If this trend continues and Seoul continues to take away even more Chinese customers, the reaction from Beijing will only intensify, increasing its military threats and economic punishments. Seoul has so far withstood this pressure and continued on its path, but it may not be so keen in the future when reactions become more severe and threaten Seoul's national security. Despite all of this, Seoul has been bullish on its arms industry for over 5 decades, continuing to support it through thick and thin, through various economic crises and major political changes. As such, Seoul will continue marching forward on its expansion course despite of the newly emerging threats. But as it marches, we have to ask ourselves a final question, the most important question in this entire video. Can this drastic success last, propelling Seoul to the number 4 position in the rankings as it wishes, or will Seoul fall back to its pre-war quantities in a few short years? Seoul still has a few years of headroom before its position will be sufficiently challenged, since the problems described previously regarding the manufacturing of European arms being for local use and Russia's inability to supply orders will persist for years to come. Seoul, of course, will continue to utilize this window to increase its arms exports, cementing its position at the top of the market with a large number of customers who have procured systems from it. At this time frame, those same customers would have built a strategic relationship with Seoul in the process, encouraging them to continue procuring their weapons with their newfound partner, which was growing in status and powers on the war stage from this exact same process. This period would also allow Seoul to improve the efficiency of its arms manufacturing, since it will be making hundreds of systems, leading to a further reduction in costs and even cheaper systems for future partners who already value the price of Korean arms. The newly decreased prices will just go on to boost this value and their wishes to buy Korean. Seoul would also be likely to utilize this period of large profits from its arms sector to continue to expand its R&D budget and efforts, once again allowing it to reduce costs and maybe even start offering new, more advanced systems, such as its KF-21 fighter aircraft. The aircraft is a joint project between Seoul and Indonesia, and it aims to become a 4.5 generation fighter to be later upgraded on into a fifth generation fighter. The new budget and an R&D efforts resulting from the sales will help in its development and allow Seoul to enter the lucrative fighter market with its own advanced offering, favoring its position in the market. If Seoul correctly utilizes this time frame, it will find itself with a large existing customer base and even more competitive offerings, allowing it to remain in a top position in the global market and maybe even become its fourth largest contributor, fulfilling its goal and helping it become a major power, able to contend on an even footing with its neighbors and decrease the threat they pose, largely shedding the need for great power patron and allowing it to stand on its own 2 feet for the first time in its thousand-year-old history.